everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here this afternoon. My name is Abby, and I am the blogger behind Crime by the Book, a crime fiction blog and Instagram account. And it is such a pleasure to be here to discuss thrilling reads this afternoon. I have loads of questions here for our authors, and I am so excited to get to all of them and to also address your audience questions. But before we dive into our conversation, I want to go around the virtual room here and introduce you to the incredible authors we'll be speaking with today. So writers, when your name is called, if you could give a little wave, that would be wonderful. First up, we have Dionne, the USA Today and #1 internationally best-selling author of the award-winning psychological suspense novel, The Marsh King's Daughter, published by G.P. Putnam Sons in the US and in 25 other languages. Her next psychological suspense novel, The Wicked Sister, published from G.P. Putnam Sons on August 4th of this year. Karen enjoys nature photography and lives with her husband in Detroit's northern suburbs. Gish Jen is the author of 4 previous novels, a story collection, and 2 works of nonfiction. Her honors include the Lannan Literary Award for Fiction and the Mildred and Harold Strauss Living Award from the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. She teaches from time to time in China and otherwise lives with her husband and 2 children in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Her new book is The Resistors. Kim Johnson held leadership positions in social justice organizations as a teen. She's now a college administrator who maintains civic engagement throughout the community while also mentoring Black student activists and leaders. This Is My America is her debut novel. It explores racial injustice against innocent Black men who are criminally sentenced and the families left behind to pick up the pieces. Kim holds degrees from the University of Oregon and the University of Maryland, College Park. Kim lives her best life in Oregon with her husband and 2 kids. Camilla Läckberg is the prize-winning, best-selling author of the Fjällbacka series, which has sold more than 23 million copies worldwide. Her books are sold in over 60 countries and have been translated into 43 languages. She lives in Stockholm. Last but certainly not least, Shari Lapena is the author of 5 thrillers, including The Couple Next Door, Someone We Know, and her latest, The End of Her. All of her thrillers have been UK Sunday Times and New York Times bestsellers. She lives in Toronto, Canada. Well, welcome everyone. This is such a pleasure to be able to chat with you all today. And to kick off this conversation, I would love to introduce the audience to your latest releases. We're going to keep things in alphabetical order here to keep it nice and organized. And Karen, we will start with you. So Karen, your new release, The Wicked Sister, is a story about a woman haunted by a tragedy in her past. Could you tell us a little bit about the plot of The Wicked Sister, and could you speak a little bit to why you were interested in exploring family dynamics and secrets in this book?
Sure. So The Wicked Sister is set in Michigan's Upper Peninsula wilderness. It's the same setting as my previous novel, The Marsh King's Daughter. And the reason I enjoy setting my books there is because I lived in the Upper Peninsula for 30 years. So I know the area very well. It's a place that's dear to my heart. The Wicked Sister tells the story of Rachel Cunningham, who grows up in a beautiful, over-the-top log cabin. You would hardly call it a log cabin. It's more like a hunting lodge in the middle of 4,000 acres of pristine wilderness. This lodge has a copper roof, stained glass windows, Tiffany lamps. It's really over the top. And it was built by her great-great-grandfather, who was one of the timber barons back when the logging was a big deal in Michigan, the whole state of Michigan. So Rachel's parents are wildlife biologists. And so she grows up following her mother and her father in the field. Her father studies amphibians. Her mother studies black bears. And Rachel develops such a strong affinity to really all living creatures, but especially black bears, that even as an adult, she believes that she can communicate with them on a deeper, almost a spiritual level. But the novel does not open with Rachel happily following her mother around in the woods. Instead, she's in a mental hospital, and she's been there for 15 years because she believes that she is responsible for the terrible shooting accident that took both her parents' lives when she was 11. And she finds out fairly early on in the novel that she could not have done this terrible thing. and so she goes back to her childhood home in a quest for answers, and that's basically the rest of the story. Of course, bad things happen because that's what I write.
Because they have to. And I mean, what interested you in looking at, a family? What was it about the family structure, the family dynamic that you felt like would make for a great launching point for a suspense novel?
Well, my first psychological suspense, The Marsh King's Daughter, that dealt with the father-daughter relationship. And I found that there was so much to explore because, especially when you make them protagonist and antagonist, it's not just strangers confronting one another, it's family members, close family members. So I wanted to have, again, that same close relationship in my next novel. So I have two sisters. They probably would say I was the wicked sister, so it was a good fit.
I love it. Well, thank you very much. And next up, let's see here. Oh, I'm sorry. Gish, lost my place in my notes here. Gish Jen, your new novel, The Resistors, is a dystopian story that released earlier this year. And when we were exchanging emails last week, you expressed how you had accidentally written a thriller, which I just loved and was so interested to learn a little bit more about. So I wonder if you could introduce us to The Resistors and maybe tell us a little bit about how those thrilling elements, stuck up on you in your writing process.
Well, I have to confess that I'm really not even very clear about what a thriller is. I'm quite an imposter, on this panel. I'm mostly known as a literary writer, right? And I've written about the American experiment from day one. So that, the fact that America is very much front and center in this book is not a surprise. What is a surprise is that I've written this dystopia. So I've written, so mostly America through an immigrant lens, mostly realistic novels. And all of a sudden I took this big left turn and wrote this post-automation surveillance state baseball dystopia. So everybody's like, well, what happened, right? We thought we knew you, Gish Jen. And what happened was in 2017, my daughter, my younger child went off to college, and I gave I'm sitting down to write kind of whatever I wanted to. My daughter was a freshman, and I had just sat through freshman orientation, and I'd heard all about how, you should explore, take risks, try something new. And, as I'm sitting down, with my newfound freedom as an empty nester, I thought, well, maybe I should explore, take risks, do something new. And lo and behold, even though I expressly given myself permission to write whatever I wanted to, right? I did not write, a novel about, a girl's weekend in Paris involving, devastatingly handsome men and designer drugs. Instead, I found myself writing this book about, about a family watching their daughter go off into the world. And just as, this is like 10 months into the Trump presidency, and, a lot of things are already becoming clear about, that we're in for kind of a rough world, and I'm worried about the future. And sure enough, my book, is suddenly set into this future in which all the things that we could kind of see might happen have happened, right? So we have a very stratified society. We have a society in which the Constitution itself is under assault. We have a society in which climate change, of course, all our worst fears have come to pass. And we have a society in which, high tech is in some ways great. I mean, the houses are now self-cleaning, and, it's kind of Roomba plus. But also, your Roomba is kind of spying on you and sending data back. And so, it's a funny thing because, here I am on this thriller, on this thriller panel. I have to say that in my case, most of the thriller elements were absolutely come from life. It wasn't that I just had this great imagination. So much as I really just kind of extrapolated from what was going on. And it's kind of, to my horror, I mean, I set my book kind of 40 years in the future. 40, 50, something like that. But actually, so many of the things that I actually wrote about in my book have already come to pass, which is kind of terrifying 3 years later. So most of the things had its roots in things that, that were projects that were already under development in the Department of Defense. I mean, I didn't make this stuff up. We can talk about more about that, but so a lot of those things, and then things like the fact that, you know, we have two classes of society, one which is really pretty, you know, pretty established and connected and so on, they're fine. But there's another stratum, which is the surplus, they're called. And sure enough, you know, the government is not too interested in their lives and does not mind if they're being winnowed. And of course, you know, here we have COVID, and we're seeing that exact disregard for people who are less connected. It's playing out right before our eyes. So like I say, I do see myself as an accidental thriller novel and a novelist. And I also see myself where, you know, I've written a thriller where, unfortunately, a lot of the worst things in my book are coming true. And so I mean, it is, my book truly is more horrifying than I could ever have imagined. I'm sorry to say.
Well, we're so happy to have you in this thriller panel. And I think it's such a great thing about the thriller genre that it really can encompass so many different kinds of books. So we're happy to have you here, accidental thriller or not.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thrilled.
I love it. All right, so let's hear about Kim, your book, This Is My America. Kim, this is your debut novel, and I just have to say a huge congratulations because this book has been getting just incredible acclaim, and rightfully so. I would love if you could introduce us to the premise of this book, and then I have to tell you also that I was kind of doing some internet stalking, and I watched an incredible video you recorded where you spoke a little bit about why you wrote this book in a way where it's really accessible for teenage readers, and I would love if you could just share a little bit of that, you know, with this audience here as well.
Yeah, so thank you so much for that. I love thrillers. I love mystery. I write young adult, and a lot of my stories, regardless of, you know, what I'm imagining, they always end up having some type of suspense, and This Is My America is no different from that. My novel is about a 17-year-old girl named Tracy, whose father has been wrongfully incarcerated for a double murder. And the past 7 years, she writes weekly letters to Innocence X, which is homage to the Innocence Project and the Equal Justice Initiative, that are organizations that help defend and look into appeal cases to either reduce sentences or get people off the death penalty. And you know, as her story is going through, her father is actually in his last year. And as part of that experience, her world really turns very quickly when her brother is then accused of killing a local white girl in their community. And he decides that he doesn't trust that he won't be found guilty for because of the lineage with his father. And this story is really about you know, issues around police brutality, looking at our criminal justice system and the disproportionate impact that it has on Black communities. But it also is a thriller and a suspense where the main character is trying to resolve not only what happened to her father so that she can free him, but the murder mystery around her brother. So it's a double murder mystery that's intertwined in a small community in Galveston, Texas. Galveston was a location where the last slaves were actually, I found out that they were no longer slaves and had not been slaves for over 2.5 years. And so it's a story that deals a lot with race over time periods. And for me, I love writing young adult. I work at universities. I work with a lot of young people. I work with a lot of young people who are trying to grapple with understanding the world in which they live and who they want to be in that world. And much of what I wrote my story is wanting to have a main character who saw a problem and wanted to resolve it. And I think mysteries, thrillers, suspense are great ways to engage any reader in a page turner so that they might not be aware of all the issues, and especially for my book because it deals with systemic issues that are often many cases that you see around the country. But even if you're not aware of those issues, you want to care about them. And that's how I sort of built in a lot of aspects of my story, and wanting to address issues about how to be anti-racist. So I dealt with a lot of that, really looking towards writing a novel that would touch a lot of readers, from young readers to adult readers, because of the sort of seriousness and in the way in which I told my story. So.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's something, just what you've said, you know, it really captures what I love about crime fiction, which is that it can discuss these pressing social issues, you know, in a way that also, like you said, entertains the reader as well, but gets them to confront these topics in their daily life, in their reading. And I love that. And I just want to say congratulations again, because I feel like so many of my friends have been reading your book and raving about your book. And it's such a pleasure to be able to actually chat with you. So congratulations and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And let's see, Camilla, next up, you have a new standalone novel, The Golden Cage, which is a huge departure from the crime novels that you were writing previously. And I would love if you could tell us quickly what The Golden Cage is about, and also share with us, why did you want to write something so different with your new release?
Well, first I would say it's not really standalone, because it's going to be, the second book has already been published in Sweden, and I'm planning the third book as well. And for me, I had written a 10-book series, a very cozy crime, very successful crime series, and I loved it. I love my main characters. I love the universe that I'm in, but it's also very much in my comfort zone. I'm so comfortable writing about Eric and Patrick and Fjällbacka and that series. So I wanted to do something that was very much out of my comfort zone, something that would give me butterflies in my stomach, that would still, scare me a little bit.
Yeah.
That was my whole reasoning about doing a whole other series.
And could you tell us a little bit about, for folks who might not know, what is The Golden Cage about?
Well, the inspiration was a fantastic book. I think you all know about it. It's The Lives and Lusts of a She-Devil by Faye Walden. I've read it since I was a teenager. I've read it and reread it every year ever since then. But for the last 10 years, I started thinking, what would a modern she-devil do? How would a modern woman go about doing this? And I also wanted to combine it with an homage to a genre that has disappeared. When I was a teenager in the 80s, there was a genre that I really loved. It was books that were filled with passion and love and power and female empowerment and sex and all of those things. It was books written by Sidney Sheldon, Jackie Collins, Judith Krantz, and that genre has disappeared. It was filled with very powerful women who would take over empires, who would eat men for breakfast, to wearing Chanel, doing it. And they've kind of been replaced by women, being, having their husbands being unfaithful. They're moving to the English countryside. They're taking over their bookstore, and they're falling in love with a guy who has a dog walking business. Nothing wrong with that. But, I really miss the Sidney Sheldon power women.
Yeah,
so
well,
it was very much an homage to that genre.
You've absolutely given us one of those power women in this book's protagonist. And if we have time, we will discuss her a little bit later. So thank you for sharing that with us. And last but certainly not least, Shari, you also had a new book out this summer, The End of Her. And it's a story that has a little bit of a Fatal Attraction vibe to it. And I wondered if you could first, of course, tell us a little bit about what The End of Her is about. And if you could also share just a little bit about, what kind of sinister interpersonal suspense you've got woven into this book.
Well, this book is it's a domestic suspense. There's a lot of tension in it. It's about a couple, Patrick and Stephanie, and they're married and they've got newborn twins with colic. And a woman appears from Patrick's past, and she claims that his first wife was in fact murdered. And the death of his first wife was in fact ruled an accident, and his new wife, Stephanie, believes it was an accident. But now we've got this horrible woman, Erica, kind of a she-devil, who has appeared on the scene, and she's saying that she's going to have the investigation into the death of his first wife reopened if he doesn't pay her some money. So that's kind of the setup. And so the new couple, Patrick and Stephanie, are of course horrified that this woman has, made up this story and it's threatening their wonderful, happy life. But as time goes on, Stephanie starts to realize maybe she's not making everything up. So the question in the book always is, you know, did Patrick in fact murder his first wife on purpose and make it look like an accident, or was it truly just a tragic accident and she's just ruining their lives? So that's basically it. And what inspired it was I came across this accident that I just thought was the most brilliant way to murder someone. And I thought it was ruled an accident and it looked like an accident and there's no way to prove it wasn't an accident. And I thought, boy, if I had a character, I would use that as a way to get rid of people. So I'm not saying that's, you know, whether he did it or not, no spoilers, but it's just the setup of that accident. It's the kind of accident that it's either a terrible tragic accident or it's the perfect murder. So that's what I built my book around.
I love it. And I see people in the comments saying that your books always have great twists. And I definitely agree. Absolutely. Well, thank you guys all so much for telling us a little bit about your new books. And my next few questions here, I'm going to open it up to all of you guys. So please feel free to jump in as you see fit. And actually, I think now that I've said that, Gish, I might put you on the spot a little bit here because you actually mentioned something that I was planning to ask the group about. And I was really wondering, you know, when you all are writing a thrilling story, how important is it for you that your stories reflect reality? Are you finding that, you know, the scarier subject matter is actually stuff that's real and true to life, or is it stuff that's drawn, you know, from your imagination? And Gish, I wonder if you could kick us off with this one.
Well, look, we have all these expert thriller writers here, so I'm basically an amateur. I'm an amateur. But I will say that, you know, for me, I just wrote what is scariest to me. And what's scariest to me are things that could actually happen. I mean, to me, if it could only happen, you know, in some other universe, if it happens on Mars, I'm not that scared, you know. I am scared about things that I think could come to pass. And like I say, I think that, you know, right now, because of technology, I mean, like there are a lot of scary things in my book, let me just sort of say, but some of the things that are the absolute scariest are things that are coming from real life. I mean, if you look at what DARPA, you know, this Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, if you look at what they're doing, I mean, it is straight out of a sci-fi novel. I mean, they are doing, you know, they are looking at, you know, computer brain interface. Do you know what I mean? This is, I make this up. And, you know, in business of people being microchipped, you know, that's, I think the first time we had a human, you know, a microchip planted in somebody's hand was 1998. So it's been around for a while. And, you know, if you look at in Sweden, they are absolutely chipping people and people, you know.
Camilla, are they?
I'm not making it up. I mean, so they're chipping people, they're using the chips to, you know, to get in and out of buildings and to charge things and so on. And, you know, I think that in some societies, maybe in Sweden, where there's a lot of trust between the government and the people, you know, that's not maybe so scary. In this country, we don't have that level of trust. That is kind of terrifying. So
I would just like to say that I would not let anyone chip me in the US at the moment. No chipping.
No way, right?
No chipping in the US at the moment.
Exactly.
We're going to connect to the postal voting. So
exactly. We don't even have a post. I mean, that's like you can't trust the post office. Forget it. So you know. So anyways, for me, the tie to reality, and then of course, you know, and as you know, in my book, I think it seems like a family is you know, in love. You know, was involved in a lot of the books we're talking about. You know, the fact to me, for it to be really scary too, obviously it has to affect somebody that you really care about. You know, your daughter, you know, people you know, you really, really, really care about. For them to be exposed to some of these things, I think to me that's where the terror comes from. But let me come from the experts.
Does anyone else want to?
I really actually, I connect a lot with what Gish said. Is for me, when I'm writing, I'm very much set in the real world. I think for me, when I connect to mysteries, it's the discovery of truth. And when so much of my work is around social justice and looking at that representation, the truth has been something that has been, not fully discovered. And depending on what kind of access or what kind of income you actually have, or what kind of bias is there, sometimes the truth looks different depending on who is inquiring what that truth is. And I think, to me, in terms of my storytelling, I think that's the most compelling way for me when I'm writing a story, is to actually pluck from the truth and look at the truth. And I think, again, very similar to Gish, when I was writing my story, I would be writing something, I would do a lot of research, I would include a component in my story, and I would look back and I would question, do people think that, like, people probably would say that this is not believable. And I'm so glad that I actually stuck with my guns to say, like, actually it is true, because now as my book comes out, so much of the things that I actually have in my book are things that are real. And I think that's probably the terrifying part in being able to tell a story, is that if you can connect people to think about, like, this actually does happen, and it could happen to anyone in an instant. And I think so much of my storytelling, what makes it be page turners, is because the reader often is connected to wanting to resolve something that they actually are starting to realize is so true to form.
Absolutely. Absolutely, completely. And let's see, does anyone else want to dive in here? I've got loads of questions if we want to move on to another one here.
Well, I can comment a little bit. So yes, a thriller or suspense, psychological suspense, absolutely has to feel real to the reader, because that's where the fright comes from. That's where the terror comes from. But in my case, what I do is I take something that I've read about that intrigues me for some reason or another, and then I explore that in the novel. So The Wicked Sister has two voices, two storylines. One is Rachel, who I already mentioned, and then the other is her mother, Jenny. And of course, the reader knows from the first page that Jenny has met a tragic end. So, it's interesting exploring how she came to that point. But both of them were inspired by something I read about in the news. In the case of Rachel, her thinking that she accidentally killed her parents. It was a story about a toddler who accidentally shot his mother. He was strapped behind her in the car seat, and he found a handgun in her purse. Terrible, of course, just terrible thing. But I thought to myself, it always stuck with me, because I thought, what's going to happen when that little boy grows up? At some point he will find out what he did when he was a toddler. And how do you move past that? How can you go forward? It would change your whole perception of who you are as a person, knowing that you did this terrible thing as a child. So that's what I'm exploring in Rachel's half of the story. And then in Jenny, or the mother's half of the story, this too was inspired by something in real life, because Rachel's older sister is very damaged, I say. She has some severe psychological issues. And that too was inspired by someone that we knew. Friends of ours adopted 3 siblings. And the 2 younger siblings did really well in the new environment. But the older one had issues. He had problems. He became violent towards his younger brother and sister. They tried everything. They ended up having to send him to an institution when he was 12. And again, I thought, how heartbreaking is that? That's like a Sophie's Choice sort of dilemma, right? You have to send one child away to protect the other 2. What does that do? How does the parent reach the point where they say, okay, this is what we have to do? So that's the sort of issue that I'm exploring in Jenny's half of the story. So for me, it's always like a real life dilemma that my characters have to deal with or solve.
Absolutely.
I actually think that as a writer, I've done 10 Fjällbacka books and 2 books about Fae so far. I've always explored the things I'm afraid of. That's where that's a dark place I always go to. I always, of course, include things that are connected to the society I'm living in, because you cannot write a book in a void. I always write a book in a context. So I do include things that are connected to this society and the world globally and internationally and nationally in Sweden that I'm living in. But the topic that I always return to is my biggest fears. And that's, as a mother of 4, I always return to children being, mistreated, being killed, being abused, because that's my biggest fear as mother, that something will happen to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that is the basic topic that I always return to. And I have to say, I'm sorry if I look a little bit tired, but in Sweden, it's over 11. So
No,
spending the whole evening with the kids. I've got 3 down and 1 to go. Yeah, so this one is not, this is Jasmine at the moment. She's the genie in the bottle, and she's 4. The other 3 have gone to bed. This one, not so much. So if
we love it.
A little bit tired, and if I'm not as,
No.
myself as well as I usually do, hopefully, I'm a bit tired.
No, we appreciate you being here and staying up late with us. Thank you.
11:30 in Sweden with 4 kids, so I'm a bit tired.
A hero. Thank you for staying up. We appreciate it.
Back in my books. I always put that back in my books.
I love it. Well, I wonder if, before we get to some audience questions here, I wonder if we could talk about characters and protagonists in particular, just quickly, because I know for me as a reader of lots of different, suspense and thriller stories, something that always keeps me coming back for more are the characters. And I think that all of you have written very compelling characters who readers will really care about and become invested in. And I would love if you guys could, just briefly introduce us to your protagonist, and also maybe speak to, do you see any of yourself in your protagonist? And I wonder, Shari, maybe we could kick this one over to you to start out.
Yeah, there's a little bit of me in my protagonist. Stephanie is a new mom with colicky babies, and I had a colicky baby, and I'm familiar with that whole sleep deprivation and how it messes with your brain and your perceptions and how you feel. And so I gave her twins with colic and put her in that sort of mindset so that when she gets all this new information about her husband, she doesn't handle it as well as maybe she would have otherwise. So there's that sort of unreality, that feeling of disassociation that she has when she starts hearing all this information about her husband. So in that, we're similar. I mean, but my husband's never been a killer, and he's never been arrested for anything. So, so what was the question? I'm sorry.
No, that's great. No, I was just hoping you could just tell us a little bit about the protagonist, and then, how much of yourself you see in them.
Right. So, okay. So, fortunately, I don't see a lot of myself in my books. Because in my books, they tend to be characters who are sort of at the outliers. They're people who have very messed up relationships, people who have tons of secrets, and they never really know the people they're in bed with. And so that's the situation with this book too. And Stephanie thinks she's got a wonderful husband and she's completely in love with him and they have a wonderful life. However, she has inherited an awful lot of money, and she has found out that her husband may or may not have offed his first wife, and she doesn't know what to believe. So that kind of discombobulation, I've personally never felt it in my life. I like to make that stuff up. But I do like to identify with a lot of women's feelings about parenthood, about children, about husbands' relationships, their position in the world, and so on. And I use motherhood in a lot of my books as a really important sort of focal point, because, once you're a mother, someone said this already, once you're a mother, everything changes. You become very vulnerable. And in this book, there are 2 mothers who are very vulnerable because they want to protect their children. And so what you'll do to protect your kids, like there's nothing you won't do to protect your kids. So I like to look at relationships, and that's one of the relationships that I find is really fraught, is the mother-child. And then I like to look at other like intimate relationships, and even, lots of relationships of close people. And I like to explore those and the dark stuff in them. So yeah, that's what I like to do.
Well, I think it's so interesting because I know Gish said this earlier, but all of your books do involve those family relationships, in one way or another. I think it's such like fertile ground for all different genres. But for
fertile ground. I mean, dysfunctional families are my favorite. They're my stock in trade.
They're the best.
We love it. We love it.
I mean, dysfunctional countries are one thing, dysfunctional families are something else. It's all of a piece, you know, one goes to the other. Yeah. So dysfunctional families are very interesting to me.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Shari, I could so relate to what you're saying about protective mothers and so on. And mine also. I do have a protective mother, and her dilemma is the dilemma I think that a lot of us feel. Which, you know, she watches her daughter go off into the world, and she wants to give her daughter her freedom, but she's afraid her daughter will avail herself of her freedom. You know?
I know, mine just went off to university. I hear you.
What? I mean, Camilla, your kids are a little younger, but trust me, when your kids go to college, you will know what I'm talking about. You know?
Well,
So
my oldest one is turning 18 next
oh,
week. So,
you're hard on it. Like I said, just wait.
I have to say, I still have a unicorn. I still have a unicorn.
Yeah. Well, well, I think everyone with these kids, as you watch them go off in adulthood, we have exactly this dilemma.
Yeah.
We're so protective, and look, we're hardwired to be protective, and it's so hard to let go of. And in my book, like yours, I have a mother, I have a daughter. You know, complicated relationship. The mother is a social justice warrior. She's a lawyer. She's kind of an Atticus Finch. You know, it is a dystopian novel, but she's in there doing her damnedest to protect, you know, to stand up for the surplus. And in this way, Kim, I think we're also a little bit allied. You know, this is definitely a social justice book. And she is there against the odds. She is fighting with what's left of our legal system. It's tough because they're now auto judges. And so if you don't get a human judge, you know, the algorithms are written in such a way that's very hard to have anything, any suits, you know, kind of resolve your way, but she's in there fighting anyway. And her daughter, of course, is in some ways just like her, in other ways not at all like her. Her daughter is a pitcher, so that among other things, the surplus have developed this underground pitching league, and that's one of their, and which is becoming a surprise of social action. That is also, I think, inspired. 2017 was the year that Colin Kaepernick first took a knee at an NFL game, and I'm sure that's why it occurred to me to start using sports and sports and sporting events as a place for people to something to organize around, and as a place to take action. But anyway, the daughter is she is a star pitcher. She's born, she's a girl with a golden arm. This girl can really throw. But anyway, I also have, so you can sort of see both mother and daughter in a way are both really able to kind of take aim, if you will, in a kind of effective way. But in very different ways. But the sort of thing that you guys are all talking about is, you know, the family dynamics are absolutely are absolutely front and center in my book.
Yeah, amazing.
And I think most of us, well, writers as a whole, we inhabit our characters' heads, you know, as whether we're writing in first person or third, it doesn't matter. When we're writing that character, we become that character. And yes, it's fun to give your character your own personal, you know, quirks and things like that. And I become that character in that situation. Yeah, that's me.
Yeah.
In fact, when I was writing The Wicked Sister, it was kind of funny because it tells the story of the mother and the daughter. They each have a voice. So the story in the past starts 20 years previous. But I was so in the mind of the mother raising this child that I wrote it as if it was in the present. And my editor flagged all these references that were incorrect. They were wrong for the year, you know. I had cell phones and everything. I don't know what I was thinking, but I just so identified so strongly with her that I had to go back and set it in the past where it was supposed to be.
Yeah, that's so funny. And Kim, could you share with us, since your protagonist is, you know, a teenager, what was that like, you know, getting in her head?
Yeah, I just want to pause for a second. I also have a unicorn who's on the other side of my door, Camilla, so I'm right there with you.
the best.
Mine is at any moment probably going to bust in because she heard me say that. So I'm right there with you.
And I'm hoping you're not referring to your like 60-year-old husband or something.
No, my 6-year-old daughter.
Just want to check. Just want to check.
Yes. But yeah, you know, my main protagonist, I think, has the embodiment of a lot of the young people that we see today. She is fearless, relentless. She doesn't take no for an answer. You know, it was really important for me to get into the head of characters of a young person who hasn't already tested all the walls and the parameters. I think as we get older, often we figure out how systems work, what are the rules, and we sort of like lock ourselves in that way. But with young people, they're still developing and forming those boundaries. And so it was so important for me to have a character who pushed those, especially because I'm dealing with social justice issues. And oftentimes you have to have a disruption. I think protests are a very close example to it disrupts something that's happening. And so for me, I really try to have a character not be so set in like, oh no, I don't want to break the rules. I think that was just such an adult piece. And I think that's what made it really, exciting. And, really connecting to that Colin Kaepernick statement that you made when it really was during that time period when I thought about even the title of my book and being able to claim what America is. And so I think all of those sort of elements within our like current setting, thinking about young people who are taking a stand, taking a knee, that was an element that actually was in my story that my main character couldn't do track anymore because she took a knee and her coach wouldn't allow her to do that. So I think all of those real elements, I try to connect to what's in the young people's minds and how they're sort of connecting to the world so that it really felt authentic. And I'm fortunate that I work on a college campus, so I'm around young people all the time. So it's easy for me to kind of think about the things that they care about and how they talk about things and how they talk about things in such a different way than I think that we do as adults. And I say it in a refreshing way than we do, because I think as adults, we think about limitations. And then I think with young people, they think about possibilities. And so much of my story was really trying to ground a young character who hadn't been, I guess, beaten. I mean, she's obviously been beaten down by the world of the hardship, but not so much that she actually hasn't given up on dreaming what the world should be. So.
Well, I just want to call out in the chat, someone is just singing the praises of your main character, Kim. So obviously it absolutely worked. So that's wonderful. And I know we've got loads of audience questions, but Camilla, I would love if you could introduce us briefly to your protagonist from The Golden Cage.
Well, Faye is, there's a little bit of Faye that is me. She comes from Fjällbacka, the very, very small town in Sweden where I placed all my books. But at the same time, I would say that Faye is my goal, the woman I would like to be. She's much tougher. She's much cooler than I am. I've always been the nerd. She's the kind of woman that gets up in the morning and, puts on her fiancé's, boyfriend's, one-night stands, husband's white shirt, and it looks fabulous. I've tried that. Many times. I always look like something out of Lord of the Rings when I put white shirt. It does not work on me. She's the kind of woman that looks like when she walks down the street, Faye has kind of like this built-in fan. I've never found that fan ever. I'm always working against my hair. So for me, she's like the woman, I'm referencing her when I do things. I say things like, oh, I did a Faye today. I told someone off, or I put my foot down. I did a Faye today. My friends are doing the same. Even guy friends are calling me and saying that, Camilla, I did a Faye today. I went into my boss and I told him he could take his job and put it wherever. I did a Faye today, and I love that. So Faye for me is someone I would love to be. I'm working on approaching Faye. I'm working on becoming more and more like Faye. I've probably still got like 20 or 30 years to go, but I'm working on it. And this one, she's going to be Faye from the start.
I love it. I love it.
The baby boss. So this one is going to be Faye from the start.
I love it. Well, guys, I could honestly keep asking you my questions for probably hours here, but I know we've got loads of audience questions that I want to be sure we get to. So I think all of these questions are actually for all of you guys, and we'll just start here. Let's see. Someone asks, do you know the endings of your books before you start writing?
Never.
I usually do. Not all the time. I think it's been different. Sometimes when I think about a story, I actually am seeing the ending. So not this book, but I had another book that the only scene that I actually saw was the ending of the book, and then I had to sort of go backwards. You know, so I think oftentimes I know the ending, but not exactly about how I'm going to make that ending happen. And because there's, you know, dealing with so many facts and crime aspects, like it has to work out. So sometimes the ending that I thought was going to happen doesn't make logical sense, but at least it's sort of a starting place of the feel of what I was trying to get to with the story.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Shari, did I hear you say you never know the ending?
I never know the ending. No, I haven't got a clue when I start.
Wow, do you plan out how it's the general course of things, or it all just evolves as you write?
I don't plan anything. I just start with my problem. Like I knew with this one, I knew that Patrick may or may not have killed his wife, and I had no idea until almost towards, you know, pretty close to the end, I decided which way it was. So I go through the book not knowing either what's happening, which is just the way I do it. Maybe it's harder to do it that way. I don't know, but it's the only way I know how to do it.
That's amazing. Wow. Yeah. And I see someone saying in the comments that they love that and you live the book with us. Yeah, that's great. I love it.
I have to write the book to see what's going to happen because I don't know what's going to happen. So
yeah. Wow.
For me. Yeah.
And Karen, what about you?
Well, I know the beginning and I usually know the last sentence, but I don't know how I'm going to get there. So, you know, there's a lot of flexibility. I have an outline, but it's not detailed at all because I love that process of discovery. You know, you're 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through a book and you get an idea and you think, oh, cool, I could do this and this and this. And you realize that you laid the groundwork for that idea from the very beginning. All the pieces are there, but you didn't know that it was leading you to that place. So, you know, for me, that's the real magic. And it sounds like Shari gets to do that all the way to the end of the book. But
I do find that you're right. Your mind lays that groundwork, and you go back and you have your aha moment, and then you go back and you go, oh yeah, I was thinking about that on a subconscious level all along because it's set up, you know. So yeah, it happens to you too. Yeah, it's a nice feeling when that happens.
It is.
And Camilla, can I put you on the spot and ask, what about you?
I'm a very unstructured writer. I do know who the murderer is and what the motive is, basically. So I know the place I'm going to end up. It's like driving somewhere. I know I'm driving to Oslo, but I don't know what the route there is going to look like. And I write chronologically, so the way you read my books is the way that I actually write them, and I discover what happens while I write it. I have colleagues who work the exact opposite way. They have this whole wall filled with Post-it notes with all the scenes laid out for the whole book, and I'm like, you crazy bitch.
I don't know how they do that.
Yeah, it's.
I love that you all are like nodding your heads agreeing, because I always get a hard time when people say like, how can you write a mystery and be kind of a pantser? So this is great.
It's like chaos theory. I mean, I am friends with colleagues who do the whole Post-it things with the books, but I do keep them at an arm's length because they can't really be, you know, at their minds full with, because you need the chaos, right? We need the chaos.
I love it. That's funny.
I do think it's a little bit like playing chess. Like, it's really amazing if you look into how differently people are thinking when they play a chess game. They're all playing and they're all really good, but they're playing in completely different ways, actually. And I think that's true with the novel as well. Someone once sort of say, if you don't surprise yourself, you're not going to surprise the reader. So I think we're always, you've got to kind of be taking that big risk, or you know, your book is just not going to be alive.
Yeah.
you know, because I come from kind of a quote unquote literary background, I've never, before this book, I had never had any idea where I was going. I was kind of like Shari. I always just kind of rode off into the distance with some kind of problem, like, you know, and just rode off and would see what happens. In this book was one big thing that was very different about it was because I borrowed from a lot of other genres, including the baseball novel. And so because I was borrowing from the baseball novel, you know, I knew there was going to be a big game at the end. I have to say that knowing where I was going was actually terrifying. I mean, I found it much more stressful than having no idea, because I knew that, you know, I was going to have to write this game. So that was the good news, you know. The bad news is I was going to have to write some kind of game that was on one hand entirely predictable from everything that had come before, but was going to surprise even the reader of, you know, someone for whom this is their 10,000th baseball novel. It was going to have to be something where they didn't see it coming. You know what I mean? It's going to surprise even that reader. And I have to say that was kind of a tall order. And it gave me a lot of respect for genre writers. You know, I'm not a genre writer, but all of a sudden I think, oh, I see, you know, I see. The good news is you're in a genre. The bad news is that somehow you've got to take this very well-established tradition and somehow make it new and make it speak, and, you know, try to make it say what you want it to say. And that's actually a tall order, I now realize. That's to say that
but you said that. Because I think genre sometimes doesn't get enough respect.
Yeah, well, you know, coming from the other side, I get it now. I get it.
And I come from the other side too. I started off in literary. And I'll tell you, thrillers I find harder to write. That's just me. But
hallelujah.
Like thrillers are hard to write.
The genre writers.
That's what we need, yes.
I love it. Well,
let's become a crime writer ever since I was a child. So I've never entered the literary side. I mean, it's like never ever step onto the dark side. Don't go there. Don't go there. So I've stayed in the criminal, you know, in the crime genre ever since I was a child. So this is music in my ears.
I love it. I love it. So people are wondering.
I started with literary because I didn't think I could write a crime novel. It wasn't until I'd written 3 literary books that I had the confidence to give it a try to write a thriller. So
usually say that in Sweden, they say that people who can't write literary, they just wander off into the crime genre.
No, it's the opposite.
I know.
Honestly, just sitting here, I feel like, well, maybe I should try it. But honestly, it is sort of terrifying. I was looking at you guys and thinking, wow, crime book, wow.
Oh, I love it. Well, we have a question here from folks who are wondering, do you guys have the titles for your novels at the outset of your writing process, or do the titles develop as you're going?
Well, for my first psychological suspense, the Marsh King's Daughter, the book that broke out for me, that I knew the title from the beginning because that's the title of a Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale. And the book roughly parallels the structure of the fairy tale. So I knew it had to be the Marsh King's Daughter. That's it. No question. Plus it was a cool title, you know, easy to remember,
totally.
Intriguing and so forth. But The Wicked Sister, we wanted it also to have a fairy tale vibe, which is why we're using the word wicked instead of, you know, evil or greedy or any other adjective you want to use. And that one we had a little more trouble finding the title too. So, you know, it can go either way.
Interesting.
Both for me. Yeah, I can either like early on think of it. Sometimes the title will just come to me and it sort of gives me the sense about what the story is, which I really enjoy. But sometimes I'm halfway through it and then I'll think of it. So it sort of varies.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, it's different with every book. You know, The Couple Next Door, I knew when I started, and the book I'm writing now, none of us can come up with anything. It just depends on the book, I think.
Yeah.
Usually the title is part of the idea for the book. So the title usually for me comes at a very early stage of the thought process, because for me it's part of the idea.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. For me, I'm like Shari. You know, some of you guys, it varies. With the Resistors, it was the last thing, and I was with probably that's more typical of me than not. But it is true that I've just sold a new book to Knopf on a very, very different book, and in that book, the title came first. So
Wow.
it's very unpredictable.
Yeah. Well, I think we have time for one more question here, and I would love to end with a very fun audience question. They ask, if you were a character in one of your novels, what role would your character play? I love this question so much. Does anyone want to kick us off?
I'm confused. What do you mean? What role would your character?
What role, like maybe would they be like the villain, or would you be the
in a new book?
Yeah, in one of your books. Yeah, what would your role be? That's how I'm going to interpret the question. I hope that's correct.
I mean, which character of yours would you like to be?
Or what kind of role would your character have in the story? Like, would you be the police officer, or would you be the wife who's trying to figure out what's going on with her husband?
I would always be the investigator because my first early books were Nancy Drew, and I've always wanted to be like the Nancy Drew of my life.
Yes.
It was like, as a kid, looking at milk cartons, trying to see if that familiar missing child looked familiar. At one point, I saw a child that I thought was me. Memorizing license plates. So I think in any story character, I always want to be the main investigator who is like charging their way. So
I definitely want to be the hero that saves the day. So, you know, I guess that says something about me.
I love it.
I would actually also love to be the investigator because I have this, you know, my father was a police officer in the 50s. I heard all the story. My father was born in 1929, so he had a previous past as a police officer. I heard all about that. I've been married to a police officer. That was husband number 2 out of 3. And I've just always had this love for the police profession and the investigators. And I actually at some point wanted to become a police officer. But what hindered me was, in Sweden, we have a rule that you have to, before you become an investigator, before you're able to do like desk job and investigate murders, you have to do 2 years on the streets. I'm just not cut out for that. I'm not that material. I can't work, you know, during nights, wrestling down, strung up drug. I want to go to sleep tonight. You know, yeah, I'm not that. So that's why I'm not a police officer.
I love it.
This is so funny to hear.
Listen, that's why I'm not a police officer.
Camilla, this is so funny to hear because I thought about trying to become a police officer as well. Yeah. Until I found out that you have to be able to scale a 6-foot wall. And I'm only 5 feet tall. But the funny thing is, there actually is a writer, Ann Patchett, actually did take the police test and pass it. I have to say, among novelists, it's so impressive.
I don't even want to take the stairs to my apartment. I do not even want to take the stairs to my apartment.
She told me there's a trick to scaling the 6-foot wall. Yeah. And she told me when I went to go read at her bookstore in Nashville that she was going to teach me the trick. And I was like, no, Ann, no, this is going to be the end of my bookstore. My publicist will never forgive me. You can just imagine, you know what I mean? Like, anyway.
Oh my gosh.
I love that. And I will add quickly, I love
the guy, or what's the trick?
Well, I don't know what the trick is because very happily it rained. And so I was scared.
You were scared.
Trying to teach me this trick.
Divine intervention. That's what we call that. Divine intervention.
Absolutely.
Yes.
But, you know, I will also say that, you know, maybe the fact that I wanted to be a police officer, you know, it's interesting that, you know, I don't long to be the investigator, and maybe I don't have so many investigators anyway. But I think that there's often something that my characters can do that I can't do. Meaning they can sing, or in the case of the Resistors, I am so envious of my character Gwen with the golden arm. And I would love to be able to throw like that. And it was funny because after reading my book and, reading so much about pitching and thinking of imagining myself as this pitcher, I kind of, we have a problem with the Canadian geese always in our lawn. And after writing and writing and writing about it, I thought, certainly I can go and scare those geese with a rock. Writing around, I still could not throw that rock more than
I love it.
So what sports could we all do together? In this panel, is there a sports we could unite, we could all do together?
I think we could probably play the board game Clue together pretty competitively.
Yeah.
Being a writer, you don't have to be able to do anything really.
That's it.
Just
You
take it
write
up and live for your characters. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, guys, I think we are actually officially 1 minute over time. Shari, did you have a really quick thought on what kind of role you would want to play?
Oh, well, probably because every character in my books is usually in a totally messed up situation. I would like to be the detective.
The detective as well.
Because, I would like to figure it out. I wouldn't want to be one of the people. No.
I'm totally agree. I'm right there with you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I just want to thank you all so much for taking the time to chat with me this afternoon. This was amazing and so much fun, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you all.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.